For 400 years, the Han Dynasty Empire fed an army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers stretched across one of the most brutal frontiers in human history, from the deserts of Gansu to the steppes of Inner Mongolia, through freezing winters that killed crops and burning summers that rotted everything. And the secret weapon that made it possible wasn't gold, it wasn't steel, it wasn't even strategy. It was a small, sealed clay jar full of fermented vegetables, buried in the dirt under a Han Dynasty beacon tower. Open one of those jars today, and you'd be looking at the same exact food technology that Chinese families still use in their kitchens, right now, in 2026. The recipe never changed. This is the story of the Chinese pickle jar, the fermented food system that fed the Han army and quietly built one of the longest-running food traditions on Earth. The Han Dynasty ruled China from 206 BC to 220 AD. Over those 400 years, the dynasty did something almost no civilization had managed before. It built and maintained the world's longest defensive military line, the Han Great Wall, stretching over 6,000 miles from the Pacific coast all the way west into Central Asia, along what would later be called the Silk Road. Today, you can still walk through the surviving sections of this wall in places like Dunhuang and Yumen in Gansu province, where archaeological digs over the last century have uncovered something even more remarkable than the wall itself: the food system that kept it alive. When historians excavated Han military sites at places like Juyen and Dunhuang, they didn't just find weapons and ruins. They found thousands of wooden slips, the bamboo and pine writing tablets that Han soldiers used to keep records. These slips, preserved by the dry desert air, are one of the richest archaeological records of any ancient army anywhere, and they tell us exactly what those soldiers were eating. We know from these slips that the average Han soldier received around 3.3 shi of grain per month. That's roughly 60 liters of millet, the staple grain of the northern Chinese diet. We know they got allocations of salt. We know they received rations of meat and pickled vegetables. This is where it gets fascinating. The Han army figured out 2,000 years ago that grain alone wouldn't keep an army healthy. Soldiers needed something acidic, something fermented, something packed with vitamins, electrolytes, and the kind of probiotic bacteria that modern science only started naming a century ago. So the Chinese turned to pickling, and by the time of the Han, they had refined it into something close to a science. The Chinese fermented vegetable tradition is one of the oldest food technologies in human history. References to pickled vegetables appear in the Book of Odes, one of the oldest written documents in China, dating back to around the 11th to 7th centuries BC. By the Han Dynasty, the practice had developed into an entire system with multiple categories. Suancai, or sour vegetable, used for cabbage and mustard greens. Paocai, or soaked vegetable, was developed in Sichuan and used a brilliant clay jar design with a water seal around the rim. The jar would be filled with vegetables, salt brine, garlic, ginger, and chili. Then the lid was sealed by adding water to a groove around the neck. This created a one-way airlock. Carbon dioxide from fermentation could bubble out, but no oxygen could get in. The result was a controlled lactic acid fermentation that could preserve vegetables for years. This is what blows the minds of modern food scientists. The Sichuan Paocai jar, in use since at least the Han Dynasty, is essentially the same technology that Western fermentation researchers now teach in modern kitchens. The water seal airlock, the salt brine, the natural lactic acid bacteria. The Han Chinese had figured out anaerobic fermentation controlled by an airlock 2,000 years before modern microbiology even existed. They didn't know about lactobacillus. They didn't need to. They just knew that if you sealed cabbage, radish, or mustard greens in a brine inside a jar with a water moat, you could open it months later and the food would be safe, sour, crunchy, and nutritious. For Han soldiers stationed along the Great Wall, this was a lifesaver. The Gansu corridor, where most of the Han Wall ran, is brutal. Freezing winters, scorching summers, almost no rainfall, almost nothing grows. Soldiers stationed at remote beacon towers couldn't farm, they couldn't hunt much. They depended entirely on supply caravans coming from inner China. According to records, a force of just over 10,000 Han soldiers needed around 27,000 hu of grain and 308 hu of salt every single month, requiring a convoy of 1,500 carts. The logistics were staggering, and fermented vegetables, sealed in clay jars, were a critical part of those caravans. Unlike fresh produce, which would spoil in days, pickle jars could survive months of overland transport in the back of a wagon. They could be stockpiled at beacon towers and forts for years. Modern researchers studying the Han military have found references on the wooden slips at Juyan to soldiers complaining about rations and trading with nomads for additional food. The image that emerges is fascinating. Soldiers stationed in the middle of nowhere, eating millet porridge, salt, and pickled vegetables from sealed jars, while occasionally trading with passing Xingnu nomads for fresh meat. The pickle jar was the constant. It was always there. And here's something almost nobody realizes. The same pickle jar design used by the Han military is still being made and sold in China today. Sichuan Paocai jars, with their distinctive narrow necks, water moats, and bulbous bodies, are made the same way they were 2,000 years ago. Walk into a kitchen in a Sichuan village, and you'll see 2 or 3 of these jars sitting on the counter, bubbling away with a fresh batch of pickles. Walk into a museum, and you'll see Tang Dynasty and Qing Dynasty examples that look almost identical to the modern ones. The shape of the jar, the airlock, the fermentation principle, all unchanged. It's one of the most stable food technologies in human history. The Chinese fermented vegetable tradition didn't just feed armies, it survived famines. Sichuan, one of the great pickle-producing regions of China, has been hit by devastating famines throughout its history. In every one of these crises, families with full pickle jars were better off than families without. Some households in Sichuan still preserve aged Paocai brines that have been continuously kept alive for more than 5 years, with each new batch inoculated by the previous one. Just like sourdough starters in Europe, just like the Icelandic skyr cultures that survived for 1,000 years, the fermentation never died, it just kept going. Now, about the dramatic image of jars buried under the Great Wall being dug up 2,000 years later, still edible, the truth is more complicated. Han military sites have yielded extraordinary archaeological treasures, including preserved food residues, wine, and grain. But the popular claim of intact jars being opened and eaten today is more legend than confirmed fact. What is documented and verified is something almost as remarkable. The technology those Han soldiers used to seal their fermented vegetables in 100 BC is identical to the technology used today. The jar design is unchanged, the fermentation method is unchanged, the end product is unchanged. You can buy a clay Paocai jar online, fill it with cabbage and brine, and make the same food that fed a soldier patrolling the wall at Yumen Pass in 50 BC. That continuity, that unbroken chain across 2,000 years, is itself one of the most extraordinary stories in food history. So tell me below, if you were a Han Dynasty soldier stationed in a freezing beacon tower in the middle of the Gobi Desert with nothing but millet porridge and a single sealed jar of fermented cabbage to get you through winter, would you have survived the 4-month winter, or would you have abandoned your post by week 2? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want more stories about the strange food systems that kept the ancient world alive, hit subscribe. Alternate Past is just getting started.